Hi everyone. So my name's Danny Johnson. I've started up a not-for-profit, essentially, called MYO Democracy. Essentially what we're trying to do is support collaborative decision-making across potentially the world in order to, and focusing particularly on public services. So a little bit of background about myself. So I've worked with a number of large corporations and state governments around process improvement. That's kind of where my background has been. So I started in IT originally, and then moved across to the business side of things. So these days I'm more like service design, the whole end-to-end experience of a customer. And my big frustration is that governments aren't doing this, and they really should. So that's essentially what brought this up. But the issues in democracy that we have that I'm trying to address. So in our representative system, and just to be clear, I've had a political scientist tell me there's 2,500 different types of democracy. You can break it into any number which ways you want. So we currently work on a representative democracy system, in particular here in Australia, the Westminster system. But over the last few years, there's been a major loss of trust in the democratic processes and the institutions that govern us. A lot of that has come down to inequality with people, plus many, many other issues. As a result, there has been a resurgence in authoritarianism. So the idea that there's one person at the top who controls how everything works, which is not quite fascism, it's not quite that bad, but essentially the reasoning behind it, if you have a look at the studies, suggests that people just want someone to get in there and get it done, right? They don't particularly care, they just want someone to get in and do it, right? So public collaboration, this idea of government coming to the people and say, hey look, what do you actually want? That is improving. And there are a lot of governments around the world that are doing that much more better. There's also a lot of very bad examples of how it's being done. Though my argument is that this focuses particularly on strategy, not delivery, and we'll go into that in a second. So currently most of our public services, and in Australia we're actually quite good compared to the rest of the world. However, they're still quite cumbersome, they're confusing, they're costly, and I can think of some other C words. The biggest issue is that they're not necessarily solving the problem that they're actually trying to address. So they'll go away in their own little policy units, they'll come up with some sort of idea and go, okay, we need to do X, Y, and Z. That gets handed off to a department, and the department implements it however they go about implementing these things. Whether it's actually solving the problem is not always, and rarely, in my experience, actually measured. So something that looks at housing, for example, they'll put in a bunch of measures, but they don't test to see if it's actually helped the situation. Not all, obviously, I'm generalising. So what incentives does a government have to improve their public services? If you look at it, it's actually quite limited. So if you consider how the government is essentially one big organisation with your management structure at the top. In this case, it's House of Representatives, Senators, etc. They're essentially the monopoly in this country. So they run all public services. Whether they want to keep it all at a federal level or they hand that off down to their lower managers, the state level. They then do the same. They control everything in their state. If there's something they say, well, you can do that at the local level, they'll hand that down the chain. And eventually you get down to local, where in a lot of cases they do collaborate to some degree with the general public. And that's generally just obviously in their local electorate and what they can do in their area. So in terms of drive for public services, the main one is retaining power. So they want you to re-elect them again so they can stay in power and they can continue driving in their particular ideology. So whether they're left-wing, right-wing, centrist, if they claim to be centrist, then that's essentially the only reason is you've got 3 to 4 years, depending on when you vote, as to that accountability cycle. So someone who's in charge has been elected, cool, all right, we'll go off and make all these changes. We may or may not measure to see if they actually worked. And then, as we see now, we're going through this major sales pitch of, we did a wonderful job, no, we did a wonderful job, they did a bad job. Hire us again. That's essentially what they're trying to tell you. And if you have a look at the various different groups that have a look at those past aspects and go, well, hang on a second, you claimed this, and this, and they're all untrue. So what you're going through at the moment with the elections is a major sales pitch. So they'll put forward ideas to go, we should be heading in this direction, roughly speaking. Hire me. Okay, well, how exactly are you going to do that? Is my big question. Another drive is potentially foreign governments. So if Australia didn't manage its country very well, then potentially another country might come in and go, well, we'll do it, because they'll get tax dollars from it. It's a very small risk, but it's a potential one driver. State and local divisions, so there's potential some competition between them. So if you look at a competitive market, like we do in our capitalist society, then they do have some drive for improving services. One of the really big ones is complaints in the media. I've seen it firsthand, not just in government, but also in large businesses, where complaints that are sent through Twitter to the CEO or to a senator flow down the chain. They get to us at the bottom of the chain within days, saying, we need to solve this right now. Okay, so quite often I've gone back with a solution. Oh no, we can't do that. You want to solve this, this is how we solve it. Protesting and lobbying, and unfortunately, protesting has a limited impact. It makes us feel good, makes it feel like we're doing something, but how often have you seen actual change come from protesting? But that's largely our only avenue. Complaining directly to someone to say, hey, there's an issue, or getting together as a group and protesting, going, hey, look, there's an issue we need to fix. Lobbying, unfortunately, has much more impact. And unless you've got many millions of dollars sitting behind you in your bank account, then good luck lobbying. So, with that in mind, saying that there's limited reason, or limited drive, I should say, for them to actually improve their public services, one of the things government takes as a way of improving those services is to privatise public services. And that might include infrastructure, things like telecommunications, energy. So the idea is basically, we know we're bad at it, so someone else go and do it. You can charge a premium for it. Right? Government actually pays you to do it in a lot of cases, or at least a portion of that. So the idea is that you'll then create competition in that particular market. So with the telcos, for example, they privatised it, they opened it up, so Optus was able to come in, they can now compete against each other, and they'll provide you with a better service than government could have done, because they didn't have that incentive to actually improve it. In theory, yes. So the cost of that service, in theory, comes down with more competition, and they add on their bit of profit on top. But in theory, the cost to the consumer comes down. However, we can see that doesn't always happen. We can see there's a lot of issues around that. So one of the issues is around proprietary IP and transparency. So proprietary, basically, in the competitive market, everyone's very secretive, and they're incentivized to be secretive. We're not going to show you or even tell you how we do our stuff because we don't want the competitors to catch up. We want our profits, which is all well and good, right? You know, you've worked pretty hard to get that position. Okay, cool. So a lot of transparency there is just simply missing. And we see issues, particularly with the big technology companies at the moment. They're all in the news. how they've got these big systems that everyone relies on. They're becoming almost a communications infrastructure, and yet completely opaque. And we're actually finding out through the media that there is stuff that they're doing that we really don't like. But because there's no transparency, because it's all proprietary IP, we can't see what's really going on under the covers. Mergers and antitrust. So again, the particular laws that we have allow for these large organisations to merge together. We have some laws to try and stop it being too monopolised, what we call antitrust laws. And we've seen in a lot of cases where that may or may not be effective. So you see large organisations coming together. So if you have a look, I mean, the US is a bit of an extreme example, but if you look at the big companies like Facebook and Google, they're big and they're just swallowing everyone up. Right? They'll just come along, we'll just pay, I'll give you $5 million, there you go away. We'll take that, we'll keep it secret, and we'll move on. So startups, much more difficult because you're now competing against a giant. You're no longer competing in a competitive market. Private control of infrastructure. This is a really big one. We're seeing that in terms of communications in particular. So we're seeing political discussions going around Huawei that do a Chinese company. Whether they do or don't collaborate with their government, we don't know. Again, it's all proprietary IP. We can't see exactly what they're doing behind the scenes. They might be legitimate products. There might not be any security risk at all, but we don't know. And all this creates high entry barriers. So as I said before, startups, it becomes more and more difficult for you to get in and actually disrupt those monopolies. The tools are coming that help us to do that. It's becoming easier for startups to do that. But the vast majority of startups have an exit goal. They plan to sell to the majors, continuing that monopolisation. Not all of them, granted. Mine, certainly not. So, what's our problem statement? So what I'm trying to do is drive efficient, effective and innovative ideas into our public services with full transparency and accountability that don't exist today at a pace that matches our social changes. So our society is changing and our government doesn't keep up. They're not quick enough. So that's what I'm trying to essentially try and solve, right? So there's multiple approaches going on around the world that are attempting this to some degree. You've got groups like the Flux Party who are in the elections currently. You've got My Vote who are going to be in the elections. I believe Adam's going to be running for Senate in 2022. These are what you might call an issue-based direct democracy. So this is the idea of allowing people to come together and discuss what our policies should be. All right, we've got a problem. How should we solve it? What do we put in place? And this is where we go back to that strategy versus implementation component. So I'd argue that these guys are focused, at least for now, but they're focused on that strategy component. How do people come together and develop a policy rather than just relying on experts who may or may not produce good results that are human-centred, and government policy groups to come together and come up with a group. How do the people actually come up with something that works for them? You've got groups like Secure Vote and New Vote. So I think, I can't remember which, but I think New Vote is the one that supports Flux. So they've got a secure e-voting platform. You see in the US and a number of other countries have been doing electronic voting for a long time. They do have some issues still, granted. But there are technologies out there that can make that more secure. So it becomes a case of risk management. There's groups like BlockPass who do, they're looking at digital identity how do you certify that you are who you are? And so that way, you can start to verify that, all right, the votes are legitimate, etc. You've got some larger ones which are a bit more aligned to where I'm trying to get to. So things like Holochain or Harmony, where they're looking more at distributed applications. So they're providing a platform, typically on blockchain, which allows applications to basically sit with you and you control your component of that. And they're essentially looking at scale of decentralization. So the idea that you don't have a central control point that can easily be hacked. It's spread out and it's distributed amongst everyone, makes it more difficult to get into. Though as we've seen with blockchain, it's still possible to get in. Essentially, you modify the data before it gets into the system in the first place. The best one I've seen so far is Democracy Earth. So they're looking at identity rights, but they're also planning government as a service. And this is where we want to play, make your own democracy. So the idea of government as a service is public services being provided like you would in the technology area as you would an API, for example. So you're providing a particular service and you can plug into it at any point you need to. That's a very simplistic explanation, but you know what I mean. You guys are tech, so.
So what's an example of that?
For as government as a service?
Yeah. Well, it's not going to be Medicare or something like that, so...
No, but I mean potentially. So this is still, I don't know of an actual implementation yet. From what I've seen on Democracy Earth, they're still more at that strategy point rather than the implementation. But I'm actually hoping to take that as into implementation, and I'll go through that in a second. So yes, how is MYO different? So we want to focus more on the implementation side of government, those actual public services. So how do we collaboratively not only come up with a better public service, but how do we also collaboratively implement it and provide it more of a peer-to-peer style rather than going to a central government for them to control? How can we do it ourselves in a collaborative way? We want to be focused on proven effective solutions and social ownership. The idea behind MYD, there's currently no legal framework that I'm aware of. However, my accountant tells me we could probably work something out. But from the social ownership point of view, I want there to be one share per person around the world for MYD. That's it. I won't have any major share in it. You won't have any major share in it. We'll all have equal legal rights. So we're going to take learnings from business management, from finance management, process management, you name it. We're going to take all the best ideas from around the world and put them together in a collaborative framework and platform that you can work with on your own. So essentially what I'm trying to do is then redesign the process of governing to be more human-centric. So our governments are slowly getting there, but very slowly, unfortunately. So if we take that more of a startup approach, I believe we can get there a lot quicker. And to do that, essentially we're providing capabilities. So providing the platform, providing the framework, providing the tools, providing everything that you need to manage government yourselves. Peer-to-peer, collaboratively. It's a big call, I know. So this idea, essentially, I'm calling publicisation. So it's a play on privatisation in the fact that we're providing public services on behalf of the government, but it's not going to be private capital. It's going to be owned by everyone. It's going to be truly public. So that means you've got access to the books. You can see exactly where all the money is going, should you want to. You've got access to all the codes. You know exactly what's going on behind the scenes, should you want to. We'll give you access to everything. And it'll be supporting collaborative decision making with distributed capabilities for you to DIY essentially, and with global ownership. So this is our current draft of the framework. I do need to do some work on it. This is version 1. But essentially this is based on a generic change management approach. So if we start at the top, we're looking at issues. What are the issues that the people are having from across the world? It could be anything as minor as there's a broken gutter that needs to be fixed, through to our environment is stuffed and we need to fix it, right? Collaboratively, we can throw all these issues in together. What doesn't happen currently is we don't get a say on prioritisation. Government controls priority. And environment, until recently, has been at the bottom of the list, right? But we can collectively put all our issues together, group them by certain ways, maybe by local council or by state or by who it impacts, and we can do that in a number of different ways. But essentially we want to try and prioritise those issues. What are the first things, the critical things that we really need to tackle now? And you can do that at multiple levels. We then move into ideas, and I'm a strong proponent that ideas can come from anywhere. It's not just universities, it's not just think tanks. Joe down the road can have a brilliant idea. What he lacks is means and opportunity. And that's what I want to give him. I want to give him the ability to actually take that idea, viewing it kind of like a startup in a way, and helping him through that to get this developed and get people into it. So developing ideas, again, we can do that. We've then got a research component. So what does the data say? So we're looking at open science. So, so what existing research is out there to suggest whether this may or may not work, this idea? How good is this idea? Maybe we need to go off and do some new research because no one's thought of this before. There's a whole bunch of things we can do in there. And there's a lot of things that we'll need to do different in this space. So a lot of research is currently behind paywalls. Unfortunately, that's the way that it often works. So even with publicly paid for research, isn't always open. So that definitely should be open. We pay for it. And it supports all of us. So, there's an alignment piece. Now, this is essentially as a mitigant to the possibility of someone who's extreme one way or the other to go, you know what, we should do this. Well, okay, maybe in this alignment piece we have things such as human rights conventions, and other agreements that we've made globally as well as locally. Perhaps we can automatically sort of rate certain ideas based on what they're proposing. And that will essentially then feed into the solutions where you actually have your vote. Yes, I like that solution. I like that it's, and within this idea, the bit that I missed out was we're including things like cost, what we expect it to cost. We're including things like what we expect the impact to be and how we expect to measure that impact. We include everything in that so that you have an informed decision. So there's 4 main components to a good democracy. You've got accountability and transparency, the 2 obvious ones. So accountability at the moment only occurs every few years. Transparency, well, that's pretty lacking. The other is knowledge. Knowledge is one of the other things we want to embed in this. So at the moment, fake news, etc., it's very difficult to understand behind that sales pitch that the government are telling you. We want to give you that information. The other is then participation. And I'll come to that one shortly. So the implementation component is taking that solution, actually putting it in place and actually building it, right? And that could take the form of a number of different things. It might be a digital solution. It might be a manual solution. Maybe we're targeting a particular group of the community who don't like computers. Right? They are still out there. So the implementation plan essentially at a high level will be included in the idea, and that's what you vote on. Yep, I reckon that's going to work. I'm going to vote for that. That implementation will also be distributed. So it's not going to be a single team going, all right, well, we'll take in that idea and, well, I don't like it, so I'm going to do a half-assed job. No. We're providing capabilities. So we're providing you came up with the idea, we're providing you with everything that you need to put this in place. All right? We'll give you the skills if you need them. We'll give you the tools if you need them. Okay? You're the one that believes in that idea. You're the one most motivated to get that working. So we want to support you, not take you away from it. And then monitor. So obviously there's a lot of monitoring components that go out there currently, done by universities and various non-profits and advisory boards, etc. We want to essentially bring all that together, and we can have what we essentially call metrics is, what are we trying to achieve? Have we achieved it? How do we measure that? And we can show all that in real time. A lot of that information is out there already. And so you can see if that implementation is working. And if not, all right, let's review it. Let's go back. Let's see what there's something else we can do. And it just keeps going around this circle. So this is essentially how we do change within a business. And the same can be applied, or same is applied to government in how they do it internally in the departments. What I'm essentially saying is they don't do it very well. If we do it in a slightly different way, and with giving you more control, I believe quite strongly that we can do it better. And that's what I want to test. So the other was participation. So one of the interesting components will essentially be that given that you have full control, the including of the finances, the budget, the whole lot, you can determine, if you choose, to develop a UBI, as an example, a basic income that everyone gets. All right? You may choose as a group that if you provide certain skills and certain activities along the way, maybe you get paid for them. And how much do you get paid for them? Collectively as a group. So you can start to work out what's fair, what isn't fair for the particular work that's being done. And so we can start to develop this circular economy inside it. And one of the big things I'd like to do is actually attach it to resource use. So the idea that plastic is really, really cheap for companies to produce and to use without any forethought about where it goes. If you attach that to a resource cost, if it's coming from oil, etc., you can put your own. I mean, that price, you could either use a fixed price or you could use a market price. There's a number of different ways we can do it, but essentially if you're tied to the resource, we can force the price or collectively choose the price of certain items to say, well, if you're going to use coal, then it's going to be a lot more expensive. Or any other sort of resource that is non-sustainable. Perhaps we drive the economy to be sustainable on purpose. All right, if you use some bioorganic material that's really, it might be expensive from a current economic term, from using dollars, but from a resource point of view, maybe it's quite cheap. And that might incentivize the different groups in here to actually use that product instead. So next steps. So it's a very big idea. I'm still struggling to distill it down into 30 minutes. But essentially what I'm trying to do is document the idea in more detail so we can put it out for critical review. I'm also trying to identify partners to help on the political, financial, research and tech fronts. So I'm not an expert in any one of them, I'm a generalist. I'm quite good at a whole bunch of different things, but I'm not really an expert in any one. So yeah, I need essentially looking for people that can help on that front. I'm also looking to develop a prototype, an example model. I need to be able to show how this could potentially work to get that in front of people who are then willing to put some money behind it. And then we're also looking for partners, so other groups around the place, non-profits, universities, whoever, that can help us actually test this and see if it works. So we're not going to just throw it in and go, cool, there you go. We're actually going to test and make sure that, all right, so for the ideas component, what if we did it this way? Would that work? Would people like it? So we take the full, proper, human-centered design approach to developing those components. So we can do that as well. So, how you guys can help? You can help identify the services that might be required in each of those components. So we need an option to, say, propose an idea. We need an option to maybe review an idea, as an example. You can help develop solution prototypes. So if you're particularly great with UIs, cool, let's go start investigating it. You can just provide customer feedback. So have a look at the tool, have a look at the prototype, and just let us know, what do you think? You can help develop the look and feel. You could also help develop working models. So if you're interested, great. So you can get online, myodemocracy.org. We do a monthly newsletter, which I haven't sent out yet, sorry. And you can also get us on the usuals, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, yes I know, we're old. Twitter, YouTube's coming with this video. And I also publish on Medium in a little bit more detail about what I'm trying to get to with this idea. So that's me. Thanks.
So we shall have a bit of a Q&A. Does anybody else here want to ask a question?
Yeah.
You? Okay.
Can you just sort of cut all that down and just in a nutshell, because I'm still sort of wondering, really in a nutshell, what it's about. Sorry.
Yeah, it is a very big idea, granted. Currently, it takes me about 2 hours of one-on-one discussion with someone to really kind of get to it. So what I'm trying to do is distill that down. So I do need some work. But essentially what I'm trying to do, if you have a look, if you think about the way privatisation works, how you've got private companies that essentially are paid by the government to conduct certain activities. So, maybe it's looking after all the bus shelters, for example. It's privatised and it's controlled, and you have high equity shareholders in control at the top of it. What I'm essentially wanting to do is compete against them. I'll compete against the government to say, we'll provide these public services ourselves, better, faster, cheaper, if you don't do it.
You're going to out sort of perform the private institutions that are doing it currently?
Currently, yes.
Why would you be able to do that?
Because the idea is that I've seen a lot of organisations in the way they work, particularly the large organisations, and they find it very difficult. A lot of them are stuck in the old way of doing things. Hence why startups are actually starting to get some traction, because they're a lot more agile, a lot more nimble, they can change much quicker. If we take that startup approach and apply that to government, great. If government then want to buy us out later, if we choose to, okay, fine. We're trying to kickstart that improvement of public services.
Would it be fair to say that this model could be used not just for government, but in any sector?
Yes, true. One of the early targets that I'd like to have a look at is body corporate strata management. So you're effectively doing the same thing. You've got a group of people making collective decisions, and they need to implement it somehow. But yeah, community organisations, all the way up to all 7 billion of us, potentially.
So it's a co-op model?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay. Next question.
Well, it's just that from what I'm seeing here, you could almost go from two different directions on this, because local councils, even where I live, are chatting about how do we bring in more democracy for our local council. And so they would be, at least my local council would be very open to looking at something like what you're doing, because they've even asked some of those same questions you've got up there. Now, are you aware of the current movement for a UN Parliament?
No.
Okay, at the moment, the thing is the United Nations, you have the federal government just assigns somebody to represent us at the UN. And a lot of people say, well, that's probably the biggest problem with the United Nations. We need it, but people aren't engaged with it because they don't get to vote who represents them. And so what we need to do, and there's an upswell movement right now, is to create a UN Parliament. And this is the sort of thing that would be, I'm sure, of interest to that movement.
Yeah, cool, excellent, yeah. So this would essentially be entirely open source. So there wouldn't be any private owner at all.
So it's not for profit.
Not for profit.
Yeah.
Well,
so
what exactly is not for profit? I mean, you're still trying to make money as a not for profit. The real differentiator is that that's not your primary goal. Therefore, you're more willing to use that profit that you made and give it back in various ways, whether it's to the people in your organisation, whether it's to other charities, whether it's to whatever. They've obviously got different legislation that sits around it, but by and large, they're very similar.
Because you mentioned publicization over privatization, or at least it's an alternative. And during the New Deal, when the US government was trying to get electricity out to all of the smaller areas of the Midwest and the South and such, a lot of the electric companies were nonprofit cooperatives. And that was how they were able to establish getting electricity out to these areas, because trying to get private business out there, no use to them at all. They could care less about that.
Exactly, and that's one of the things I want to take on.
And we've got the same problem here right now with getting the national broadband network, is that there's just no interest by big companies to bother out in the bush.
Yep.
And the government, current government just says, who cares? We're not going to bother to spend the money. So what do we do?
Exactly. So let's give those communities the tools that they need and the money to back them up to put their own infrastructure in place for energy, as an example. Yeah, as a cooperative, yeah. So you have questions for that?
I just wanted to mention second-tier co-ops, cooperatives, yeah. So this sounds like a good fit for the structure of this.
Yeah, it does, yeah. So I've taken ideas from a whole range of different areas. So I'm not saying that I know exactly how it's going to work. What I'm saying is let's come together and actually test what does work.
Yeah.
Right? So hence why it is a little bit vague. I'm not saying that we're going to do it this exact way. And if you take the agile approach, we have the broad understanding and we're pretty certain that that's going to work. We're going to split it up into, okay, we'll do this bit now, this bit later. As we get closer to it, we'll look at it in much more detail. We'll do proper research, we'll do proper testing, we'll work out this does actually work as far as you guys are concerned. It does what you want it to do.
Yes. How do you see this, if you could look into the future through a crystal ball and you can see where this is going to go, where it's going to end, what would it look like at the end of the day? What would this ultimately be if it was actually done and fully implemented and out there for people to use? What would it look like? What would it look like? Because at the moment I'm sort of thinking to myself, what would it actually be?
Yeah. It's a bit of a tricky question. There are so many different factors. I mean, it could be just knocked on its head straight away. There could be so much competition or so much pushback from existing incumbents. So whether it's government, whether it's large corporations, they may all just completely decimate it. They might, attack us so strongly that that's it. The public opinion is just gone. That's
because they want to maintain power. They want to keep control.
Exactly.
So So, but if you get around those, if you get around the any sort of objectionable parties like people that want to maintain control, if everyone wanted to surrender the power to the people, how would it work? Because I think that if we talk about the power in those smaller communities, if it falls upon every person on the planet to decide, or in a region to decide for that area, I still sort of think that people would be sort of more concerned about their own areas, and minorities would still be a minority, so their voices collectively wouldn't really make an impact to actually initiate change.
Yeah, and that is one potential issue. So we've got, this is where our alignment piece comes in. And maybe that's a critical flaw in it. Maybe we can't come together as a community, as a broader community. Maybe the maximum this could ever get to is a small community. Maybe.
Can you give an example of that potential problem for me to understand?
Which problem?
The problem that you brought up, that
So people being selfish. There's a lot of research around that selfish gene that they may call.
Yes.
However, there's also a lot of competing research that suggests that as when we're in groups, we actually become much more selfless, and we give a lot more. It really comes down to the value that we feel we're getting out of it. So I believe, it's a belief, that collectively if we come together, then we can find a fair way of supporting everyone.
I think that when the community comes together, and I think you see it more in smaller communities. And in fact, I was talking to an Uber driver yesterday that was from Lebanon who said that over there you don't have to work because your community supports you. Everyone stays together and looks after each other. But I think as communities get bigger, you find that the bigger a city gets, the more populated a population gets, the more there's no eye contact, there's less socialising, there's more problems in society. And I think that one issue is that people are good, but people can also be greedy. Yep. In times of plenty, people are more generous, but when times are tough, people are sort of more concerned about themselves. So if you're in a small community in a remote area that wants electricity, but the cost of getting electricity to them is much greater than providing community to the masses in the inner area, but the masses in the inner area are the ones deciding or have a bigger voice because of the numbers of them. Those smaller communities might not, even though they're all putting their hand up wanting the same thing, they might get what they want because they are just so small. That's where I met with that.
That's the Constitution. That would be like the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, where you'd make sure that everybody's needs were met and equitably rather than simply equally.
Yeah. So this, I didn't have this one in my initial thoughts, my initial draft. Mm. As I was going through it, I realised that there was an issue for majoritarianism, where you've got larger groups just taking control. So this component, or whatever that ends up looking like, I'm not quite sure, but whatever that ends up looking like is there to combat that. To go, all right, cool, that's a great idea. However, what about these groups?
The other question, the other thing that I'm I'm trying to envisage this in my head, is, and I'm sort of thinking of the internet, because the internet is like a communication tool, and people can log on to things. I know there's security issues and you call it validating your credentials and things like that. But if everyone wants to go online and be able to vote for something, or if there was a referendum where people were sort of saying somebody wants to do something, what does everybody think about that? And people sort of then can log in if they want to, I suppose. I don't think there'd be any kind of compulsory vote in this model. Okay, so people that want to vote would log in and put their credentials in, however it might work, and sort of have their say. I think if that's the way it sort of goes, and is that sort of the way you sort of see it sort of developing into the future, is some way like that?
Potentially, yeah.
Okay, because what I was thinking was that to get that through, to get that to happen, to make that a reality, I think that you have all these obstacles in your path, including the powers that be that want to maintain that power. And I'm sort of thinking to myself that maybe an approach that you might want to think about, or the way I'm thinking is, maybe if you have something and something where people can have their say in a in more of just an opinion sort of poll thing, much like the Morgan polls, where people have access to go and have their say, and then the politicians and the powers that be can sort of tune in and listen and say, hey, look, people have logged into MYO Democracy, and actually the heat there is that the overwhelming majority says we should be doing this. So they'll be paying attention to those sort of things.
You've got those polls already out there.
But then that could evolve into a more powerful thing where it becomes the
Point of reference.
the point that more than just that. It'll become like the actual thing that affects change. So, and I think that's sort of coming in from another angle as well, because that way you're sort of sneaking it in under the government's or the powers that be's.
Yeah, because behind the course there's no democratic way, but if we set up that way in a non-binding way,
Yes.
at least we could make it clear
Yes.
what we want
And
democratically.
then that could possibly evolve into a more controlled sort of
Well, that's
global
essentially-
entity.
That's the approach that Flux in my vote attempting to take.
Okay, I think what you're trying to facilitate, and maybe what you're still trying to work with, is I think you're trying to facilitate more of a town hall sort of situation. Whereas over here, we're still working with a representative model, right? And representative models are good because you've got people who are experts on things, but at the same time, you don't want them taking the whole pie, right? Whereas with the town hall, you've got a chance to get direct engagement with people and their problems. To me, democracy is not just about having yourself represented, which is good. We want that. That's the whole no taxation without representation stuff. But it's also, democracy is also about making sure that power is shared, so that no one person has too much power and takes it too far, like unfortunately is happening in a number of countries, like the one that my accent represents, right? But we want to spread that out. And there are some sociological steps here that you kind of need to go along with what's happening here. You mentioned UBI. I think you're quite right. Because right now we've got people who have no time anymore because they're so desperate just to get by. So you'll have people with 3 jobs or 1 job that still takes like 60 hours a week, which means there's no time for that. And yet there are 12 people applying for every job right now. There are not enough jobs, but there are people who are having to work too hard. If with UBI we were then able to split things up, one thing we could do is ensure that 1 day a week was voting day. That everybody could come together in a town hall. It doesn't matter what day of the week because it's all electronic, right? But everybody has 1 day a week. They all work a 4-day week, and 1 day you just read the newspaper and you start voting on things that concern you. But you could also, there are some of these groups, I can't remember which ones, say you have something you care about, but you only have so much time, and you know that person's an expert or at least agrees with you, so you just move your vote to them and say everything to do with X, they get to do the voting for me, which is also something great that could be done through something like this. So I should let you talk.
No, it's good. And you're right, there's a million and one different ways it could be done. Hence why I'm not trying to dictate any one model. I'm just focusing on the framework at this point to say that this is roughly how we should go about it. But what happens exactly in each of those I haven't defined. I don't want to define, not my own. I want all you guys to come together and go, all right, well, we actually research and test it, and we'll do proper development of, all right, well, this is a system that works. So let's run with that. So we can use this model internally to build up MYOD platform itself, and we can trial it and make sure it works. We can look at things like strata management, so we can start trialing with other people who have never even heard of us. We can start looking at local councils, example. They might want to start trialing something similar as well. Maybe we have a lot of different configurations in here that, maybe one group would prefer to do it by representation, maybe another would prefer to do it direct. Maybe we can incorporate both of those features. And just keep developing from there. The publicisation aspect of it was simply the thought around how we could potentially get it in place by providing, essentially competing for the existing tenures that are out there by government. Right, well, we'll provide that service, say, for example, managing bus shelters, but we'll do it in this model and we'll prove to you it can work. Maybe that's one way.
Okay. So, sounds like, does anybody have any final questions to conclude? Okay, thank you very much, everybody. So, and also thank you to you very much. So, one final clap, and we'll end this video. Cheers.